Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our online event. My name is Anna Locke, and I'm chair of BrumYODO and host of tonight. Carrie, unfortunately, is unwell. You will have noticed we are streaming this event through YouTube, which means none of our panel can see or hear you. However, we'd love to see your comments and questions, which you can send to us via YouTube comments facility. You will need to log in for this or email us on info@brumyodo.org.uk. If you are tweeting about the events, you can use the hashtag LifeDeathBrum and tag @BrumYODO. To let you know a little bit about BrumYODO, we were set up in Birmingham 2015, and our vision is a society which talks openly and honestly about death to help us prepare for dying and loss. Since then, we have designed and created spaces for these conversations through collaboration with arts organisations, community groups, individuals and the voluntary sector, as well as delivering life-enhancing public events, including our annual A Matter of Life and Death Festival. This event is part of our 2021 festival programme related to the presentation of the spectacular outdoor artwork In Memoriam by artist Luke Jerram, which opened this weekend in Aston Park, Birmingham, and will be free to visit until the 16th of May. In Memoriam is a touring artwork comprising of 120 flags made from bedsheets in the form of a blue medical cross in a circle of white. It is a temporary memorial for people to visit and remember all those who have died during the COVID pandemic, as well as pay tribute to all the NHS health and care workers who have been risking their life during the crisis. People have responded in very personal ways to In Memoriam, and Luke intends his work to operate on many different levels. Some are moved by it, others have found a space for contemplation, and children have had a great time chasing each other around the flags. Luke sees In Memoriam as an invitation for people to have a conversation about life, death, and dying. Something we've already seen reflected in the comments from people we have talked to on site. We've been able to bring In Memoriam to Birmingham through a fantastic partnership with the Birmingham Hippodrome, funding from Arts Council England and Without Walls, and generous support from Birmingham City Council, Arts, Aston Hall and A Natural Undertaking. You can find out more about our whole festival programme on the BrumYODO website. During the course of the pandemic, we have witnessed amazing examples of collective activity in all areas of national and local levels. Here, tonight, we reflect on the importance of creativity and community with remembering death and dying and bereavement. So what I'm going to do now is introduce our panel. So, first off, we've got Graeme Callister, who's the Director of Festivals at Birmingham Hippodrome. Graeme directs in-house festivals that include B-Side Hip Hop Festival, Summer on Southside, and the Chinese New Year. He has produced and directed the biannual Birmingham Weekender and was the creative producer for the 2018 Commonwealth Games handover ceremony. Graeme has been instrumental in helping us working with us to bring In Memoriam to Birmingham. Dr. Saab Clare is Deputy Medical Director and Acute Medical Consultant at Sandwell and West Birmingham Hospitals NHS Trust. Saab has been on the front line caring for hundreds of people affected by COVID, witnessing firsthand the toll it has taken on our community and NHS colleagues. Marcie Porteous is a single mum and Customer Success Director for a global tech company. Since April 2020, she's been the driving force behind So Marvellous, a volunteer craft group based in Birmingham, who have been lovingly creating and distributing 28,000 handmade items to charities, community groups, and the NHS in our city. She's chair and trustee of the Big Community Sew, which enables home sewers across the UK to make for charitable causes. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry about the muting. That won't happen again. What I'd like to do is start off really with start with Graeme about why the Hippodrome has decided to commission this particular artwork at this particular time. Graeme, can you tell us?
Hi, good evening, everybody. So, yeah, I mean, multiple reasons really why we wanted to bring In Memoriam to Birmingham. As an artwork, it's actually been touring around the UK now for over a 12-month period. And I've been lucky enough to see it in a couple of locations in Bournemouth and as part of the Greenwich and Docklands Festival. And one of the challenges I have in my role with the Hippodrome, one of the challenges at least, is that it's often, I'm often programming led or theme led. So it's quite difficult to bring an installation of this nature to Birmingham without having a surrounding context. So I actually met with Antonia and colleagues from BrumYODO probably about 2 or 3 years ago now at the Hippodrome, where we talked about exploring ways that we could work with BrumYODO and A Matter of Life Death Festival. And sometimes it takes that long, sometimes in terms of programming, working with partners to actually find the right project that could work for both parties. So following that very early conversation, when Antonio approached me with it, it was a bit of a no-brainer for me because, as I say, I've seen it as an artwork. It's a really accessible artwork. It's something that we can bring, obviously, to Birmingham at this time in restrictions that we have, in terms of something that the public can go and access and enjoy, and also have a moment of reflection. It was an opportunity for us to work with a very different partner in terms of we work with multiple partners on our festival's work and a whole range of things that we do. So it's great to be able to work with a different partner and also engage with very different audiences because of the siting of the artwork in Aston Park. And again, the wider partners that we can work with on the project, which is also appealing to be able to be working with Aston Hall and also make those links with Aston Villa and other community partners in the area. So those were good enough reasons to start with. Obviously, as an artwork as well, it's very important to me, and I think to the Hippodrome, that we are able to reflect on the impact of the pandemic. As we know with our theatres and festivals around the country, the saying is, first in, last out in terms of the economy, the economic recovery. So it's great for us to be able to deliver work that the public can access and keep the arts and culture in this public mindset in this way. We delivered an art installation called Global Rainbow over New Year, which some people may have seen. It was a laser light installation off the top of the rotunda. It actually went over the top of your hospital, so if I'm correct, pretty much in that direction. And that was a fantastic piece to realise because, again, as an artwork, it's something I've been aware of for several years, going back to 2012 Olympics, actually, the last time it was seen in the UK. And I've been looking for ways to bring it to Birmingham and to bring it work that I do. So the opportunity to bring that artwork, which is a rainbow, to have that acknowledgement back to the NHS and our key workers, but also because it's so visually impactful in terms of when you see it. I mean, it genuinely has a wow moment. To be able to bring that work to Birmingham, do it on New Year's Eve, where it was the last event of 2020, first event of 2021, and also the direction that we're pointing it in, very like Memoriam. It was deliberately chosen that way. It wasn't just to hit the hospitals, it was also to hit communities in that part of the city, so that beyond, who we know are low engagers with the arts. So a lot of what we do on Hippodrome front and our festivals, learning participation work, is about engaging wider communities that we have in Birmingham and communities who don't necessarily access arts in the same way. And that's why In Memoriam, again, as a piece of public art, is very important because it's very accessible, it's outdoors, anybody can go and visit it, it's free. So, I mean, you can't make it more accessible for people. So multiple reasons, as I say, as well as the opportunity for us to get out of, beyond the mothership, which is the Hippodrome in Southside, and actually engage with, wider communities in Birmingham. So a whole range of reasons why we were delighted to be able to commission the work and work with BrumYODO at this time.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we had been talking, hadn't we, for a little while about how we'd work together, and it's this last year with so many deaths, it felt like we really needed to do something creative, but it does seem to have it spoke to BrumYODO as well, and it's been really, really good to work with you. I mean, it's as a bunch of volunteers and working with a very professional outfit. I mean, obviously a lot of our volunteers are professionals as well, but it's a kind of different vibe for us. Saab, can I go on to you now? Because you've been up to see it when I met you up there yesterday when we were doing flag making. Could you tell us what impact it made on you?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you, Anna, and the team for inviting me to speak on such an important subject, and hi to everyone that's listening. So I visited yesterday with my son, 9-year-old son, and my husband, and there's no doubt that it had impact, and it's very, very clever in the usage of hospital sheets. And there was a bit of a wind to it as well, and it felt a bit eerie, but yet there was calmness as well. So it did have huge impact. And there was a few kids running around, and they were really blown away by it. And what I really like, what you guys have done, is that you put it in Aston Park. You put it in an area where these patients, this population, was affected by COVID. You know, they're from a deprived population, ethnic minority, and it's a message to our population and saying, we have not forgotten about you. You guys were affected, and these things, this installation, speaks louder than words. And I think that's very, very clever and very important that we send that message to our people, that they are not forgotten, because they felt, and you know, our patients from Smethwick, Aston, and so forth felt, you know, incredibly. I mean, they went through so much. They had so much death, so much devastation. Their families, generations were wiped out from COVID. And what this installation does is, I mean, it pays homage to the people. And I think it's a great piece of work, incredibly impressive. And it's really important that this kind of population have accessibility to art. They don't typically engage with it. It's not something that they're used to doing. It's not, you know, it's not something that's sort of, you know, open to them. And this is great. So thank you to the team for bringing that here to Aston and Birmingham. Thank you.
Yeah, and I certainly found it interesting being there yesterday, because we were counting the number of people through the gate to actually into the kind of smaller area, well, actually under the flags. And as the security man said, gosh, if you counted the people who are around playing cricket or going for walks who would be seeing it without necessarily having to venture through the gates, it's an awful lot more. And you could see people were noticing, but not having to go in and go into art. It was kind of there, and then we'd get people saying, well, what's that, and why is that there? And it's it's a different way of looking. I guess that's public art for you in many ways. Marcy, you've also been up to see it on the rainy day. It's been open so far, when it was much more blustery. You, one of our community partners, would you mind explaining to us how So Marvellous have become involved and why the idea spoke to you guys as a group?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anna, and thanks for having us on the call today, and hi to everyone who's listening. So my volunteer sewing group started as a direct result of the pandemic last year. We originally started making scrubs for the NHS due to shortage. And once that kind of subsided, we moved on to making face masks. Now, over the last 12 months, what we've done is kind of become more of a community group that directly responds to particular projects in the community. What we've found as a result of what we've been doing, that actually the crafting community has really kind of come out of its shell over the last 12 months. Lots of people getting involved. And for them, it's also a sense of community. We've created a group that are, you know, basically friends now, even though most of us have actually never met in person. So what's happened more recently is that we've been approached to become involved in projects in the community. Yarn bombing has become, I want to say, there's been an explosion of creativity, not to, you know, choose my words carefully, but we're seeing throughout the community now, people are actually starting to come out and decorate things, try to make things look more beautiful, and actually try to brighten up the place, because a lot of people are feeling that, you know, it's their way of being able to contribute and just make the world slightly prettier to look at, because we've all had such a difficult time over the last 12 months. So when we were asked to participate in this, we absolutely jumped at the chance, because our whole thing now as a community sewing group is to participate in meaningful activity and to give back to our communities. And we felt that, you know, the installation over at Aston Park is amazing, but we want to get people there. Like you said before, Graeme, you know, this type of artwork isn't accessible to a lot of people. So to be able to do something in a local community in the parks that actually raises awareness of something big that's happening, but also sparks conversations on a very local level. So even as we were putting the decorations onto the trees, and you'll see them in the parks, they're bright yellow, they're covered in crochet flowers, you know, they've got signs on them saying in memoriam. But even as we were actually decorating the trees, it was enticing people in. What's this all about? Why are you doing it? And it gave us the opportunity to talk about what was happening over at Aston Park, but also for people to reflect on what had happened over the past year. And the amount of people that approached us while we were doing it and said, thank you for doing this. You know, it's making a difference. We want to be able to celebrate people that we've lost. We want to be able to remember. And I think a lot of people felt that it had just been brushed under the carpet. So to have something that's quite visible and directly in the community in that way, it's actually opened up a lot of conversations that perhaps ordinarily wouldn't have happened. So we're really pleased to be involved in it. And, you know, the conversations needed to happen. So I'm glad that this artwork has become the catalyst through which that was made real. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this idea of kind of not forgetting people is really, really important. And I think there's going to be a lot of people trying to process what's happened, because of course people die all the time. I mean, we've died forever, haven't we? But this year seems to have been a particular tsunami of dying, and the focus that I noticed right at the beginning of sorry, now I've got a telephone going, that we noticed at the beginning of COVID was that everyone was talking about saving people, but we knew lots of people were dying, and we weren't really talking about how they died or who they died and remembering those who died. And that felt wrong, really, because it was like, well, no, we've got to save everybody, and somehow if you died, that was almost like you'd let the side down. The national narrative was about saving, and I think that made it tricky in hospitals when you were caring for people who were dying. I mean, I don't know, Saab, whether you would mind commenting on that.
Yeah, I mean, just going back and just thinking about what happened last year, I mean, it's like this sort of, it is a nightmare when you think back what happened. It was like an explosion, and you just dealt with it because you had to, and you were all on adrenaline. But one of the things that I will always remember is everyone's eyes, the fear in everyone's eyes, the patient's eyes, my colleagues nursing, because we didn't know anything about the virus. We didn't know how to deal with it. It was just, we were trying to learn from Italy and China and so forth. But it was the eyes that you will never forget, because we were all masked up. And we are a caring profession. We touch, we hug, our facial expressions are so important, but then that was stripped away from us, where we had to wear, look like sort of aliens and zombies. And that was horrific for our patients. And in the beginning, the first wave, we didn't have relatives coming in. And that, I mean, that's just, you look back at that and you think, how did that happen? But I will always be humbled by the team that I work with. We made sure that anyone who died, they did not die alone. There was someone always with them, and that was our narrative. So, looking back, incredibly tough. I mean, things have improved. We have learned more about the virus. We know how to handle it. But I think, for me, the hardest thing was dealing with, when we had families coming in, families dying together, brothers, sisters, husband, wives, granddad, son, and a grandchild. I mean, that's just, it was like dealing with car crashes every day with families in them. And that's trauma in itself, because we are used to death as medics, but we're not used to the sheer volume of death and in the way it was, because we were dealing with something that we couldn't solve, we couldn't cure. And dying of breathlessness, dying of being out of breath is incredibly scary. Our patients were drowning, they couldn't breathe, they were gasping, and Anna saw that, time and time over again, and it was tough. It was really tough, but we all sort of got through it together. I mean, one thing I want to talk about was, I think we mentioned not forgetting the people. Absolutely. I mean, every day we had the charts on TV, didn't we? The numbers of infections and the death rate. I mean, that I used to hate watching that. I mean, my son used to put it on and I used to switch it off, because it's not about numbers, it's about the people. And it became a number game. And that was just wrong. People were forgotten about. And one thing I want to say is that this virus was not discriminatory. but society and systems are, and we as people have the responsibility to change society and systems, and recognise the poor, recognise deprived, recognise ethnic minorities who have been inadvertently, affected by this virus.
So do you feel you've maybe turned more into an activist as a consequence of what's happened? Has that kind of lit your fire, do you think?
I think we've always known that if you are poor, you're like to die sooner, and you have decreased life chances, decreased opportunities. But what COVID has done is it's exemplified that. It's really put it out there in the mainstream, and I'm really keen that it doesn't just get brushed under the carpet. I think we have to learn from the lessons of COVID. We have to learn from it, because if we don't, we are foolish. There's so many things we have learned. So many good things have come from COVID, and it just worries me that we'll just go back to some kind of. We want to go back to normal. We shouldn't go back to normal. We need to learn and care for the people who are affected, because the people are affected for a reason, and that is essentially inequalities in society.
What was interesting, actually, while we were doing the installations in the parks, was for the most part, the majority of people we spoke to were actually quite welcoming the idea of being able to have a conversation about what had happened, and quite freely coming forward and saying, oh, this is my story. Oh, I lost this person, and telling us, experiencing it with them and just going through their story. But there was the odd one or two that said, I don't want to be reminded of what's happened this year. I don't want to acknowledge that this has gone on, and we're actually quite sort of negative about having something so visible out there, because there was a sort of sense of denial. I don't want to be reminded that this is all around us. But I think you're absolutely right. Now the world has changed. We will not go back to how it was before. It probably isn't going to go away. And so I think for me, there was that awareness. There are still sections of society that don't want to deal with it just yet, but we have to in order to move forward. So that was quite an interesting couple of conversations, to be honest, and something I wasn't really expecting to come across when we did it,
And do you think, I'm just wondering, Graeme, when you think about commissioning art, you must have to think about the sensitivities of how things would land. Because I think, as BrumYODO group, we're all like, oh, let's have conversations, let's open up this, let's take down taboos or whatever. But actually, as an arts organisation, presumably all the time having to think, actually, is this the right time to start these conversations? Should we be doing this?
Yes, we do have to consider that, but it's also of its time as well. As an artwork, so we want to be able to present art of the moment, as it were, and this was an opportunity for us to do that in a very sensitive way. It's not. I don't feel it's in any way a controversial piece. We also know, because it has been presented elsewhere around the UK, we know what the reaction to it has been in other parts as well. So we do that kind of intelligence gathering before we, make those decisions about, again, where and how we might present this work. We originally were looking at could we present the artwork close to the QE hospital, because there's a piece of land that exists outside the Birmingham University Medical School, which I felt would have been a great location, because it's very close to the hospital. It would have been able to be accessible to hospital workers, key workers, but also people traffic going through that area. As it turned out, we couldn't put it there, because what we discovered was that, and this is the wonderful thing about presenting outdoor work, it's actually the site of Birmingham's only Roman fort, which is located underneath the green patch. So, but I think on reflection, actually, that was probably quite a good move to take it away from so close proximity to the hospital, because I think it could have, impacted adversely on not just members of the public going to and from the hospital to loved ones who may be recovering or may have died in the hospital. But equally, as you were saying, Saab, the kind of impact on the workers, you know, and the staff, because it's kind of not wanting it to any way be insensitive or be in anybody's face or making people remember. Because I think you have to respect that some people do want to acknowledge it and do want to, you know, come to terms. And I think for other people it will take a lot longer. And some people like the whole grieving process generally, you know, some people shun it for quite some time and don't want to engage. So in the end, I think on reflection, it was very good to take it to Aston Park, because it's actually opened up other opportunities for us. And as you say, again, it was a conscious decision working with the park service, again, which park we locate it in. We were very, very clear that we wanted to locate it in a part of the city where we knew there'd been a higher impact of COVID on communities. And so we looked at Handsworth and we looked at Aston, and it really came down to, again, which site was the best site and practical actually as well, which these things often do become as well. So, yeah.
I wonder, just Saab, how do you think staff would have felt? I mean, I'm as an NHS worker, because we talked about valuing our patients and our families, but I mean, I also work in healthcare, and I feel like there's been a lid lifted off conversations. There's an awful lot more openness to talk about death and dying, and people who have spent years avoiding the subject have kind of outpourings, really. And how do you think it will land with people who've worked in health?
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much, like Graeme has said, it's a grieving process for us as well. You know, we've lost loved ones, we've lost our colleagues, and we've lost colleagues who put themselves before others. So real admirable, you know, to do that. So I think the staff do need something, and I really like the fact that we've got that blue NHS sign, which is sort of seems quite robust in the middle of the flags, and it just seems that we were standing strong amongst this, you know, terrible thing. I also think, you know, that, you know, it's varied across the staff. Some staff just don't want to talk about it and just want to get on with it. But I agree, it's been a long time coming. There's, you know, we have these discussions a lot because of the fields we're in. So Anna with a palliative care hat on, myself with acute medicine hat on, and we deal with death a lot and have those open discussions. But, you know, in a perverse way, it has enabled our colleagues to talk about death and talk about that subject quite openly with their patients and others, something that they never used to. And it's about talking about your own mortality. We knew when we were going into work that we could catch COVID and die. And some of us in the high intensity areas were told, go and write your wills, sort out your finances. And, you know, that was just a curveball. So I think it's opened that Pandora's box, and for Anna and her team, it's progressed things years and years in a matter of, in that month. I mean, it's progressed. I mean, would you agree, Anna? I mean, where we were and where we've come to now.
Yeah, I mean, as a palliative care doctor, I have spent years saying, you know, come on, guys, we can do this, because 30% of people in their last year of life in hospital, 30% of people in hospital at any time are in their last year of life, which is not really what hospitals see themselves as set up for. They see themselves up as saving and curing almost at all costs. And that dialogue has really been forced out. And I think it's been acknowledged. I think our society has had to face that as well. I mean, it's the narrative changed from, you know, all about ventilators and oxygen to accepting maybe that we have to do other things as well. And although there's still a lot of attention paid, I think, in the acute medical area and in where actually a lot of the less glamorous care happens, a lot more of the normal dying happens, and they felt less attention, less less going on. We're having YouTube issues, I think. So I think for me, I think it's really important that we do something for everybody. Okay, I'm just going to pause for a minute and let everybody come back on.
One of the things I hadn't realised was that I had a friend that died about 6 weeks ago, and she'd been poorly for ages. And a couple of weeks before she died, I messaged her and she said, "Oh, I'm in a hospice," you know. And so we knew that it was towards the end of her life. But it started a conversation where what I hadn't realised is actually that when you're in a hospice, you get coaching, you get, you know, the people that are looking after you actually talk to you openly about what's happening, and in the best way possible kind of help you to prepare for dying. And it hadn't occurred to me that that was what was happening in those environments. And shortly before that, my cousin, who's been a nurse for years, and I didn't really ever know what she did, posted something on Facebook, and she was in the news because she and a group of her colleagues had made a conscious decision to actually just go and hold the hands of people that were dying and actually just be with them in hospital in their final moments because they couldn't have family and friends with them. And it had never occurred to me that there would be just such a difference, you know, when she's talking about 30% of people in hospital are on their last year of life, that there would be such a big gap between those two environments in terms of the way that we talk about death and dying at that moment. You know, it seems perhaps one of the good things that's coming out of this is that we may start to have more of those conversations. But that was a little unexpected for me, to be honest. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but it's opened up a conversation I never thought I'd be having about my own demise and what I want to do, and, you know, preparations for when I die. And so that was unexpected, but positive, I think, in a way.
You're absolutely right, Marcy. I mean, I think we talk about birth and we talk about, you know, the beginning of our life and so forth, but we never talk about the end. And that is the process of life. We all are going to die. And, you know, what are our last wishes? Who do we want to be around? And that all sort of doesn't happen. And, you know, and that often leads to a lot of upset for the people that are left behind because things weren't said, or the whole sort of finance issues and so forth. And it just causes so much rift and upset between families. But it is about, you know, speaking about the unspoken. We need to change the narrative, change the taboo. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. COVID has changed the landscape, you know, talking about death a lot in, you know, in the media, on, you know, in TV, hospitals and so forth. And people, interestingly, hospitals are seen as safe places because people come to hospital and they think they're going to get better, and, you know, doctors will make them better, doctors and nurses, and then they go home. But actually, you know, a good proportion of our patients come to hospitals to die, and actually that's not their preferred place of death. So why be around strangers, be in an environment that's, you know, not suited really, but ideally for you to have your family around, to have your loved ones around and so forth. And unfortunately, COVID made that worse because families couldn't come in, especially in the first wave when we were really not allowing family because we were really concerned about the spread of the virus. So yeah, I think it's really changed that narrative, and we need to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, sorry everybody, we're having a technical difficulty. I'm Alison Cox. I'm one of the BrumYODO members of the board. So I'm just stepping in for Anna for a moment. One of the things I wanted to talk about, we're talking about, you know, a community helping people to grieve, as well as supporting people on their, you know, while they're dying. One of the questions I wanted to ask Marcy, in the work that you're doing around with So Marvellous, do you have people come to you when they're doing their creative work? is that generating those conversations fairly easily? I suppose that's one of my questions. And the other one is, are people coming primarily to do some sewing with you, or have people started to come to you because they're aware it's an opportunity to talk about death and dying, but not necessarily in a very direct way, that they can do it more gently through the process of doing something creative?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's such a hard one to answer because people don't often reveal why they get involved in a project. You know, the sort of the gentle art of craftivism is often quietly spoken, you know. So when we have people join the group, it's generally because a number of reasons. It could be loneliness. It could be that they really want to do something positive in the community. It could be that they just really love sewing, you know. And quite often, because we've all been so remote over the last 12 months, it's quite difficult to get into those conversations. So what we've been trying to do is actually create this kind of community and this openness so that we can have those conversations, and doing things like Zoom meetings in the evening around a particular topic, or we've got a WhatsApp chat where we, you know, message each other, and through those mediums where we're in a comfortable and safe space where we know each other quite well now, because we've been working on these projects together, people are starting to open up. You know, one of our, I won't mention the name of the lady, but one of our team leaders, we have 4 team leaders all over Birmingham. One of them lost a brother this year, like within the last month or so, and found it really difficult to engage with the sewing and to get involved in the projects because it was so very close to what she was going through. You know, we're creating a set of memorial trees throughout parks, and she's literally just lost her brother, you know. So she took a bit of time out, I think, because it was just too close to what was happening, but then sort of came back a couple of weeks later and is now very involved in the project, and actually made something to put on one of the trees to remember his name and put his name and the dates on it and stuff. So I think it's a real mix of things, to be honest. I mean, what I'm grateful for is that she had the opportunity to be part of a group that were involved in something meaningful, and that she could open up to us and have that conversation and explain what was going on, and that we were all like, we're right there in it with her, you know. So she wasn't isolated or alone. She actually had like this new group of friends, albeit virtually, where she could open up about what had happened. So from that perspective, it helped her. I wonder whether by listening into those conversations, other people within the group have also been able to kind of take some comfort in the fact that they're not alone going through something, and that there are other people having similar issues and similar loss, you know. So yeah, it's really difficult. People often don't open up in that way, but hopefully people at least feel like they're not alone in the way that they feel, you know.
Yeah, great, thank you. Right, I'll hand it over back to you, Anna.
Are you okay, Ali, leaving? Sorry about that. We had a complete computer meltdown in our house.
Don't worry, we're having every technical issue thrown at us, aren't we? But we're dealing with them all.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Ali.
Okay.
Yeah, just thinking about people being inspired. I mean, our service set up a table for making flags in our communal area, and it's actually been incredible stuff that I had no idea about. And I think we're quite a tight team. People have been decorating, making their own flags, and really telling stories that it's just really lovely. And there is definitely something about the making, not just the seeing. And I guess that's why Without Walls, the community sort of said, yes, have some funding to do some community engagement. But it's been a bit of a, you know, like learning experience for us, having never actually, we've talked a lot about talking to communities, but it's the first time we've really actually kind of directed. And we shouldn't tell the Hippodrome now, should we? We're keeping it. But it's been really interesting. Lots of different groups, people, deaf schools, and lots of schools actually. Really lovely that schools want to take part, because we've had conversations before with schools who've been interested but a bit nervous, and it's like something's been just let go of, and they can see how it's relevant to them. I think this leads nicely on to kind of what almost is public art, and it's reminding me of the Hearts down in London, opposite the Houses of Parliament, which is of course a very different kind of public expression, isn't it? And I think I mean, I think it's got quite a lot strong. So for those on the call who don't know what we're talking about, it's quite hard to miss. Bereaved relatives and I think activists as well have been putting red hearts on the side of the Thames opposite the Houses of Parliament for everybody who's died. And of course, that's an awful lot of hearts. And I don't know, it's kind of somewhere, Graeme, I don't know where you would see that in the scale, in the sort of scale of public art and activism, because it's not even really legal, is it? What they've been doing. What do you make of it?
I think for me, sometimes that's the best kind of public art, because it's genuinely by the public, you know, and has that community engagement. But they are very much, again, they're of their moment, and it's very hard to engineer those kind of projects. You know, they just manifest. You know, it's a bit like the NHS clap. You know, I would call that, you know, a public art project, or you could classify that as a public art project, I think, in terms of that participation. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I'm you know, with our hip hop festival, we have a lot of graffiti artists, and it's interesting when you look at that, because graffiti is taken as a kind of you know, it's a bad thing because people are drawing on side of buildings, but you know, without that tagger, you know, developing his first tag and his style, then maybe he'll never go on to be, you know, develop that work and create something more of scale that can be more beautiful. So yeah, I think personally, I'm all for public art. I think the problem is that we have in the UK is that there's not enough good public art. A lot of our public art is, you know, statue based, or less interesting, less ownership, I would say, of the art.
Yeah, and I think that who owns public art? Who says it's okay? Almost who decides what we do? Because all we've been talking about so far is temporary, isn't it? You know, we're talking about things which are here now, and that might be the right thing for the time we're in, because we don't know how we'll feel in a bit. But actually, there's a school of thought within, and it's not just about palliative care. I mean, there's a movement we call compassionate communities, which really sets out the idea that we need to move towards not the conservative dream of everyone doing all the statutory jobs, but this idea that birth to death, as a community, if we work together and to support each other, actually our lives can be enriched and more powerful as a consequence, and we all have different skills. And part of that from a death and dying is thinking, actually, what do we need to do to support each other, but also actually what role does art have? How do we remember? At the moment, we really seem to, pre-COVID, I'd say, mostly we remember people who've died at war or during a particular violent event, and actually the dead are out elsewhere. I mean, cemeteries have moved into town as towns have expanded, but actually often even the crematorium, they're on a hill away for reasons. But this kind of where do we sit in the kind of art? How do we remember people? And that planning into the future is an interesting thought. I can just see someone's Claire on the chat. There's a lady called Claire Marshall, who I think I know, who said that there are a number of permanent memoriam projects currently in the planning. Some arts and some gardens, and she's interested to know whether anyone on the panel has got some learning you'd like to share with the people planning those kind of things. I don't know, Marcy, I just from doing something quite so, I don't know, ephemeral, because do you clear up the yarn bombing after it's been there for a while? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think Claire's question's more about the permanent projects, but you know, for us having a temporary project, there's quite a lot of logistics involved in making sure that it is well looked after, that it's visited regularly, that it's, you know, maintained, that anything that you put out into the community is safe and isn't flammable or isn't going to cause a public health hazard or isn't made of glass or plastic or something that's just going to damage and harm the environment. And we spent quite a lot of time working out how to attach things to trees without damaging the tree, you know. So the planning and the sort of thought process going into it, I mean, yes, it's a temporary piece of art, but you know, acrylic wool, for example, will probably outlive all of us. Anything that we've made will still probably be around in 100 years looking as good as it did today, because that stuff's pretty much indestructible. But it makes it great for outdoor art, which is why a lot of yarn bombers use acrylic wool, because it just withstands all weathers. You know, that stuff doesn't fade, it doesn't disintegrate, it just stays. So I think for me, things need to be very much of their time. They need to represent what's happening now. It needs to be very obviously representing the thing that happened for it to be good, like memoriam projects for me. I just, you know, there's a lot of conceptual art, and there's things that could wash away, and there's things that are only going to stay for a very short amount of time. These things that are going to be long lasting, you know, need some narrative on the piece, because you look at that in 50 years time, and if someone can't go, that's what that meant, or that's what that related to, you have to make it really obvious, I think, especially when it comes to, you know, tapestries, for example, or big quilts and things like that. It has to incorporate words, or at least very, very obvious imagery to portray the thing that it's supposed to represent. Otherwise, it would just become meaningless in the passage of time, you know.
So it's about being explicit in what you're doing. So we're not kind of, and when people talk about death and dying in words, often they use euphemisms, or people kind of say things that can be misinterpreted, or almost deliberately sometimes. Lots of other ways of doing it, and I guess you can do that with art as well.
Yeah, you've got to be literal, I think, for the longer term.
Sorry. Just Saab, I know we're building a great big flashy new hospital, and we did have a brief conversation about actually where art and remembrance fits in that, because of course actually it might be very tempting, mightn't it, to build a hospital that ignores death, that is kind of, we're about saving everybody, which, you know, I think the sort of aspiration of only expected deaths allowed here is probably a pipe dream. And even if it is, there's still the history. I mean, City and Sandwell Hospital have got its roots way back into a poorhouse, into a TB hospital, into a workhouse, and actually the future. Is that something that's been discussed at the Trust about art in the?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, again, COVID has exemplified the need for us to, you know, pay respect to, you know, families, generations that we've lost, especially our community, who are, again, really disproportionately hit. And it is on the agenda, but I think we have to just keep plugging away, because when new builds come up, I think everyone wants to concentrate, as you said, on the positive sides and making it all right. Let's all, you know, but, you know, death is part of what's going to happen in that hospital. One of the things that there's a lot of glass in that hospital, and it's a lot of light, which really does blow you away, considering where we work at the moment, which has, you know, it feels like you're working in the dungeons. But there is thought of having our loved ones' names engraved in the glass, or family names. So that has definitely been there on. So just one of many ideas. But also one of the things that's really important is that any art that is commissioned, you know, one of the pacts that we've made has to be local. It has to come from the people that are going to use a hospital. It's their hospital. So, and one of the, you know, things that we keep saying, it's more than a hospital. We want to make it a community area where we do lots of education and things like, you know, introducing people, opening the doors to art, to these, you know, kind of things that they don't have accessibility to, or they don't understand just because of education and social class. So we need to get the community involved. It's their hospital, and make sure that they are involved in delivering this, you know, piece of art to remember those that have died. But also, you know, patients will die in there. So how are we going to sort of remember those? I mean, there's lots of ideas coming up, and that this is where we need your help, really, and your artistic minds and influence.
Yeah,
I wonder what the kind of digital memoriam is going to be, you know, because, you know, I've often wondered about whether there's an opportunity for kind of like digital shrines personal shrines for family and members, because when we think about the age that we're in today with social media, you know, if you're of a certain age, your entire life is spanned and tracked on social media through film and image, and often as not, it's held by, you know, so many your friends, your family, you know, your extended family as well. And actually, is there an opportunity to bring those things into one place, which I would think could help provide an awful lot of solace, is that the right word? You know, comfort perhaps to those people who've lost someone. I mean, I'm kind of, you know, I know what BrumYODO do, and it's interesting how, you know, bringing the conversation up about, you know, matter of life and death, because death used to be such a massive part of society 100 years ago. It was all around us, you know. I mean, you were lucky to survive to 5 years old. I mean, infant mortality rates were through the roof in this country in Victorian times, late Victorian times. You know, your average age span was 35 or something like that, you know, at the turn of the century. So when you go to graveyards, you see these, you know, visible memories of people with the tombstones. But in our society, with the breakdown of, I think, of certainly the kind of Christian faith, people have moved away from that kind of recognizing, you know, places to go to remember their loved ones, and it has taken on more of a personal you know, way of personal faith, personal way of remembering people, which is quite individual. We don't come together as a society anymore so much to remember those people we've lost, unless, as you say, there's been a war, or, you know, something that needs, you know, a political statement, because that's what also these memorials are, you know, for the Great World Wars. It's not just remembering our dead, but actually it's a way of remembering, well, which side won and which side lost, and actually, you know, where does the political will and might still reside in the world. So that's a constant reminder of our national identity. In a way that I think with COVID, will this government want to remember this particular pandemic and how it's been handled? I mean, of course, you know, absolutely 100% recognizing the value and all the hard work of the NHS. And I think that's been, I mean, you know, who would have thought before the pandemic that we'd have a particular party in government who would invest so much money into the NHS, and an institution that is so beloved by the country. But would that have happened if we didn't have the pandemic? Would the investment that, I mean, look at the investment now in terms of nurses' pay. I mean, I just kind of think, you know, the public has formally, you know, acknowledged the value of the NHS to our society, and yet here we are still waiting for our politicians to catch up and actually acknowledge that as well, and invest where, you know, society wants that investment. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now, but yeah, I just think it's very interesting the way that, you know, we've moved away as a society because, you know, there's been other things that have happened over time that have taken us away from those kind of traditional ways of you know, engaging with death as an everyday occurrence, you know.
Yeah, and the digital approach has really changed. I mean, it's such a shame Carrie can't be here as an undertaker. I mean, they as the chair, I mean, she's talked a lot about moving funerals online, and actually I've heard quite a lot of people talk about, almost, although that has been awful in many ways, it has opened other doors at the same time. So we've had a situation where people are able to join. I've got a lady at home I'm looking after at the moment who hasn't really been out of the house for 2 years. She's got chronic health condition, and she was able to watch her best friend's husband's funeral online. And actually, I said, oh, wasn't that difficult not to be able to? And she was so pleased to being able to, she felt she was there. She was sent some flowers. So she's had her, you know, and that's something that a year ago, the crematoriums, it would have been, or not, a year and a half ago, actually a year ago, they weren't ready for that. But actually there have been other doors opened, and how we remember. And I think the thing with digital legacy is we have to all remember that actually some of the platforms may not exist. So Facebook may not exist. So if you're relying on Facebook for your digital legacy, it's not been here that long, although it feels forever. It might be that we've got to look for other ways of remembering people that are slightly more old-fashioned and concrete. Or so what do you describe your wool, Marcy? What did you say your wool was made of?
Oh, indestructible.
Yes.
Maybe we need to
made
create
of acrylic
archives out of wool.
Yeah.
Permanent
And I guess
archives out of wool, I think.
Yeah. And who will remember? I wonder how many generations will remember. Someone's asked in the chat why the Spanish flu hasn't got any memorials, and I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because that the wars it is the public narrative. It's our fiction, isn't it? That we won the war. And actually, the Spanish flu really did well. It wasn't even Spanish, was it? To be perfectly truthful, but we haven't been keen to remember that, and I think our recent elections have shown how perhaps politicians are not keen to remember some of what's happened, even in the very recent history. It's an inconvenient truth. So, can I just put this out there now? There's another question about how can communities be engaged in this development of future memorials? How do we actually go about it? So saying what it should look like. So I'm not suggesting that any of us have the answers. I just wonder how could we do it? What would be your starter for? Anyone want to take that question?
I would say that some communities are already engaged in the development of memorials. We do have memorial gardens. We do have places of remembrance. We have the more traditional forms, and then we have new community groups taking it upon themselves. I think ultimately it's about how do we make the wider community know that these things exist, and how is it a way to engage with it, because we're often caught up in our lives, the living bit, rather than thinking about what happens after when we die, or what happens when we die.
I think it's also giving permission to communities, individuals, groups. It's okay to be vulnerable. So vulnerability is really key, but with vulnerability, you need trust. So they need to trust, the groups that are trying to encourage art. So that is key, because without that, they will not open up, they will not express, they will not engage. And for me, it would be trust and vulnerability.
I think it's also worth mentioning, the public works of art. I mean, if anyone's considering it, please make sure that you get permission from wherever you're going to put it before you put it up, right? So a lesson that we may or may not have learned over the last couple of months. Part of the reason that yarn bombing is so popular, and at the moment, people are doing it undercover. No one admits who it is, and they do it anonymously. And that's quite interesting, because actually, if you were to tell someone in advance what you were planning on doing in that respect, actually it might not be allowed. Whereas, some of these small pieces, for example, covering the top of a post box with yarn for Easter, for example, is seen as acceptable. Whereas, putting 4,000 padlocks on a bridge is clearly quite dangerous, and, could cause an accident like what happened in Paris. And so I think for me, it's about making sure that the location that you want to put the thing in is publicly accessible, doesn't cost people to see, is in a location where anyone could access. Public libraries are a great example, hospitals, for people are going to be walking through, seeing those things, because a lot of the stuff that we've done in the past has been behind closed doors. No one's seen it. It's been inside a building or tucked away somewhere. And I think it being publicly accessible and visible is a really key part of it, and free to access. Other than that, I mean, it's also about the scale of the thing too. It has to be big enough so that people can see it and go, oh, what is this? So that you engage with it, bright and, obvious. And I just think that for me, it's about being public, being accessible, and being visible. If you can tick all of those 3 boxes, there's absolutely no reason why more people can't start doing. And actually, we, as a group, we've now been approached, since we did the trees in the park, have been approached by another group that want to do memorial trees in the gardens in churches in a particular town. You know, so for me, this seems to be like the start of something quite big. It almost seems to be sort of gently rolling out a much wider scale once we've started doing this, and it's about promotion as much as, you know, anything, to let people know that you're doing this, and it's a good thing, and it's, you know, and it's safe, and it's not seen as a menace. You know, back to your point about graffiti.
Yeah, I think it's also quite subtle as well, though. You don't realize until you start looking about how many memorials there are around you. You know, I mean, I go for a walk around a local country park. Every single bench is, you know, there in memory of somebody who used to walk around there. There are, you know, natural burial grounds, you know, also close by. You know, you see the memorials for people who've died in roadside crashes everywhere, you know, in terms of on lampposts. And so actually, you know, there's a lot of recognition, or memorials, modern memorials that are out there, but they're not necessarily, you know, we're not necessarily shining a spotlight on them because we're respectful of them and the individuals, and they're personal to those families and to those people who've lost those loved ones. So I think you know, there are these subtle things that exist which are, again, temporal, but yeah, are important, and if you have your eyes open to them, you know.
And I think also we perhaps remember in ways, or we create in different ways. So when we talk about different cultural groups, I mean, many people cremate bodies and have never had cemeteries, don't use cemeteries, use rivers, and increasingly people are scattering elsewhere. But a lot of faith groups don't recognise the way Christians have historically remembered in a sort of stone way or a place way, and especially people who are dislocated from their homelands are all the time recreating their narrative and remembering, and how we remember in stories. And I guess the question is, do we need another big piece of stone somewhere, another sculpture? You know, actually, if something happens, if we're going to do something in Birmingham, it needs to be good. And then it's like, well, what is good art? As someone has asked, what makes public art good? That's quite a way to end the conversation, isn't it? Oh gosh, Annie, we've just got an interesting banner. So should we just wind up now on this final question about really what makes good public art? And actually, Graeme, what would you say makes good art if we're talking about remembering?
Wow. Well, I mean, that's only a small question, isn't it? I mean, it's very much down to personal taste, isn't it? In terms of whether you like, whether something moves you or not, or you find something appealing. I mean, I look at, I suppose, one of the most famous pieces of public art, which I think has been a massive positive, is the Angel of the North. You know, it's a landmark. It's a phenomenal piece of, you know, art that you can see for miles around. It's, you know, done a huge amount of things in terms of placemaking and civic pride for the people in Gateshead. Very much Gateshead, not in Newcastle. So pieces of art like that can be hugely transformative. I think of also the Dream. I think it is in St Helens, which is a giant sculpture of a young girl's head. Which is it Dream, I think. Anyway, it's on a former colliery site. So again, it's recognizing the former uses of that site, and it's providing other reasons for people to go and use those spaces. So I think we can get it spectacularly well in terms of public art. You know, I think I also think of you know, the Poppies Memorial that you saw at the Tower of London. And that was incredible piece of work, and amazing that could also tour around the UK and people could engage with that. So there's really fantastic pieces out there, but it's also a lot of, you know, less fantastic, and that's often, I think, down to the commissioning process and who's involved in making the decisions about, you know, which pieces of art and, you know, where can it go, and as Marcy said, you know, who's paying for the upkeep, Who's looking after it? I mean, more often than not, our councils are cash strapped. They can't afford to take on these long-term pieces of work, pieces of art, pieces of public art, because they don't have the budgets to. So even in the public art world, we're seeing more and more temporal pieces, because we know that we can put them up and we can take them down again, and hopefully not too many people will be offended by us doing that.
And that was really palpable up at Aston Hall yesterday, with the kind of feeling of pleasure from the staff working there to see something that was really good. Like, there was really, and they could manage it, and the council have been incredibly supportive. But they were able to kind of go, okay, well, we haven't got a lot of money, but we can let you use our space, and we can be supportive and interested, and our staff. And actually, you could see, because we had to work with the council bereavement service as well, and everyone was just like, wow, yes, this is something we should be part of. But everyone's been able to give what they can give, which I think is really important right now, because I think maybe part of the story of the last year is people have lost their sense of who they are. They're feeling that I think for Saab, maybe as an acute physician, you've certainly been able to reserve who you are as a doctor. You've kept that, but actually the doctor who saves people has gone a little bit AWOL, maybe. And palliative care, I've carried on doing what I do best. But I think for a lot of people, it's getting back to a sort of sense of having a value in what we do. And I'm just wondering even whether the naughty yarn bombing, that's a small act of rebellion, isn't it? That's a kind of like something we can do that maybe no one will know about. Saab, have you got any thoughts you want to end up with?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the sort of the question, what makes art great art? I think it again is individual taste, but it's about something that has an impact on you. I remember seeing The Angel of the North first time. I actually worked in Gateshead, and I was driving in the dark, and I was absolutely blown away by it. It was so scary seeing it at night, but it was so impressive, absolutely impressive. To stuff that I've seen abroad, like I'll always remember The Fearless Girl in New York, when she's facing the bull. I mean, that connects to me. That says so much to me. So I think it's individual what has impact on you. And there's so much out there, but making it accessible, making sure that it's for all people, no matter where you come from, and making sure everyone has the opportunity to be able to express themselves and be involved in art. Because I think sometimes it is just for the elite or people that have the opportunity to go to museums and pay that a lot of money to go there. So I think we need to make it accessible, and having it outside, is brilliant, because anyone, no matter what age, where you come from, can experience it, and it does have profound effects on you.
Yeah, and it was very noticeable when we were up there yesterday that people who, like, especially there was a family with 3 little boys in their Aston Villa shirts, and they were just so chuffed. They had a lovely time running around, and they had a lovely time making Aston Villa flags. But it wasn't, they were kind of like, they just happened to be there. And of course they might have chosen to go and see it in town. I don't know either way, but it was just lovely to have so many people stumbling across something and feeling inspired to do something, and then have a conversation and share memories and ideas. And yeah, it was really gorgeous. Marcy, is there anything you'd like to say now?
Yeah, just on that final question then, for me, I think good public art has to be simple and impactful in a very, very clear way. If you look at The Angel of the North, it's exactly, you can see what it is, right? You've got the statue of Christ the Redeemer in Rio. It's like instantly recognizable. Or, Robert Indiana's Love in a square. Those, you look at them immediately, they're recognizable instantly, and they deliver a very clear message. So for me, it's not about whether something is, beautiful or liked by most people, or in a very public place. It's about, does it deliver the message simply and impactfully in a very short amount of time? And I think for me, that's what makes public art good, I think.
Thank you. I think we're going to call it a day, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us. I've found this really interesting, and I think reflecting on the journey that I've made in my job in palliative care and SARB in the hospital, and how actually creativity is so important in marking what's happened, but also finding space to just stop and reflect and acknowledge what's happened. And I certainly really like the fact that we are doing it in beautiful ways, because it's been an ugly year in many ways, and it's really it's good to be somewhere beautiful, and to be associated with something beautiful. And I think that's what I'd love to kind of like a feeling as part of BrumYODO that we can pass on a bit. And Marcy, it's been awesome having community groups, and there's other community groups involved, and people saying, you know what, actually we want to do this and we want to take it to the next level and take it elsewhere, because actually, you know, our little group's just a small group, and it seems that something that can go elsewhere and carry on. So people want to carry on making flags, or they want to do actually something else that's inspired by, and create lots of little conversations, because they're what we remember, really, not necessarily the big art, but the little conversations. I'm just gonna, and Graeme, sorry, I'm just going to check on the chat, because I'm just going to have to lean around the corner a little bit. Oh, lovely, really nice comments actually coming through. So people saying thank you, very valuable and insightful conversation, and thank you very much to SARB, Graeme, me with my technical problems, and Marcy, and yeah, thank you, Graeme, as well. I know for the Hippodrome, you're much more used to being behind the camera, or behind the stage, the sort of the organizer, the commissioner, and it's been really interesting to hear how you make decisions, really, and think, what should we do and why should we do it, because actually that's very important to know.
It's a privileged job, it's a privileged role, so I'm very lucky to have it.
Lovely, thank you. So we're going to end the broadcast now. Okay.
Thanks very much, Anna. Very nice to meet everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening.